Good afternoon, everyone. On behalf of the University of Chicago Institute of Politics and the Center for Effective Government at the Harris School of Public Policy, I am proud to welcome you to today's event entitled City So Real, Chicago Summer of Protest. My name is Mylan Patton. I'm a third-year double majoring in political science and economics with a minor in human rights. I am an alumni of the IOP's Bridging the Divide program, and I also serve as co-chair of the IOP's Student Advisory Board. I am sure that I can speak for many others when I say that I was excited for this documentary and am greatly looking forward to this conversation. The appropriateness and relevance of City So Real is so apparent in such a time as this. We are at a time where we as a community, city, and nation are at a crossroads when it comes to not only social engagement, but also social injustice. And we see this firsthand in the city of Chicago. Divides between the police and its citizens, elites in the working class, South Side and West Side, North Side and South Side, and the Gold Coast and the Soul Coast. Most of y'all have received a link to view the 5th and final episode of City So Real, and I hope that you have either gotten a chance to or plan to view it in the near future. Today, we will be joined by the Academy Award nominated director of the documentary, Steve James, as well as Amara Enya, public policy strategist and former Chicago mayoral candidate, to discuss the film and the ways in which the events of summer 2020 have changed Chicago politics. This conversation will be moderated by Taman Bradley, WGN news anchor and political reporter. Steve James, the director, is said to have wanted this documentary to serve as a mosaic of a great American city that in so many ways is reflective of many cities across this nation. We hope that in the end, you might walk away inspired and better aware of this great mosaic that is the city of Chicago. Thank you and enjoy.
Well, thank you so much for that, Mylan. That was delightful. Good afternoon and welcome. We're here over the internet so that we can observe social distancing while we discuss the 5th and final episode of City So Real, You've Got to Make It or You've Got to Take It. You know, it's a real treat to moderate this discussion. I admire the great filmmaker, Steve James, and the policy wonk, gentlewoman and scholar, Amara Enya. Amara and I go back a bit. You know, when we were both in high school, we attended broadcast camp together one summer at Bradley University. During camp, we learned about TV news. On the last day of camp, we were tasked with putting together a newscast with each participant performing one of the news jobs. I was picked to anchor. Of course. Amara probably was the executive producer, you know, the boss. Anyway, we're going to have a great discussion with Amara and Steve. As a journalist, usually with a daily product, I write the first draft of history. For 2020, my draft is awfully rough. It's my best effort, but who knows if it's any good. Usually in storytelling, there's a formula and you just plug in the information. But there's no template for this. We've just never experienced anything like 2020 in our lifetime. And so we've had to make it up as we go. Events are unfolding at warp speed. It's almost impossible to keep up. We're living in a moment that's testing our individual and collective resolve. I don't live with regrets because I like to say you can only make decisions with the information that you have. You don't know what you don't know, right? For generations to come, 2020 will be examined. Some of you are probably going to write your thesis about it this year. We don't know what we don't know. I hope the work being done by reporters covering the events of this year has been accurate and impactful. And we hope Steve James's wonderful final episode of the documentary accurately reflects this unprecedented moment. Immediately following the killing of George Floyd, something happened. With Amara and Steve now, we're going to talk about that. Then something else happened. We're going to look at that. In a 1967 speech at Stanford University, Dr. Martin Luther King said, "Certain conditions continue to exist in our society which must be condemned as vigorously as we condemn riots. But in the final analysis, the riot is the language of the unheard." Let's get to it. Audience, in about 30 minutes, we're going to open up to take questions from you. Please use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. You can actually start submitting the questions now if you'd like. If your question is selected, a staff member will privately message you with the next steps. And since this is a Zoom webinar, we can't see or hear the attendees. So if you need to step away from your computer, no problem, do it. All right, let's jump right into it. Steve, let's start with you. First of all, can you tell us about City So Real? What is it? Why did you do it? And then could you tell us why it was so important to go back and add a 5th episode that updated your project with the events of 2020?
Absolutely. It's great to be a part of this, this conversation. This is something I've wanted to do for a number of years now. I've been here for about 35 years. Wasn't born in Chicago, I confess, but I've wanted to do a kind of portrait of the city. And the idea always was to try to find a pivotal moment in which to go out and tell that story. And so when the mayoral election rolled around a year and a half ago, roughly, it seemed like that was the moment, because between the fact that it looked like it was going to be an incredibly wide open mayoral race, even before Rahm dropped out, and the fact that the Laquan McDonald trial was going to be happening in the middle of it, I just thought this is that moment. Chicago finds itself at a serious crossroads, determining its future. So we went out, we shot 4 episodes. We made 4 episodes. We thought we were done. And then the pandemic hit. And when the pandemic hit, we thought it would be good to go out and do a kind of postscript to at least show what was going on in Chicago now, because the last thing I wanted to do was have people watch the first 4 episodes and think of it as ancient history. That the world has changed so much. Like, what is this? It's not ancient history, of course, but when George Floyd happened, it went from being maybe a postscript to a full-on episode, because we felt it was vitally important to get out there and take stock of Chicago in this moment, which is, in a sense, in my view, it's taking stock of America in this moment, because I really do think that's what's going on here is what's going on everywhere.
And that's always the case with Chicago. Amara, Mayor Lightfoot is very much at the center of the 5th episode. She ran on a pledge of good governance with a promise of more equity. She obviously could not have predicted a global pandemic. How do you think she's performed?
Well, I think, first, I'm really glad to be doing this event with you. And we do have just a wonderful history, and it's good to see you keeping the faith in the profession. So I'm really excited that you also got to see sort of this political environment here in Chicago. So it's been such an interesting last couple of years. As you said, who could have predicted what would have happened with the pandemic and with the uprisings around the country? I think before the pandemic happened, there were a few significant events that, so we had the teacher strike that happened in October of last year. We had a number of things that went down that I think were giving us insight into the kind of mayor that she was going to be. And then the pandemic happened, and now we're more in crisis mode, so it's a little bit harder to judge. I still think that, one of the things that's really come out, at least in conversations that I've been in since the election, is the fact that there was a lot of talk about equity and a lot of talk about, the disparities in the city. And yet from even corners of support for the mayor, you also saw some dissatisfaction in decisions that had been made in City Hall. And so what I think a lot of folks are experiencing is perhaps not seeing the same level of follow through in action as they heard during the campaign. Obviously, any person who's involved in politics knows that governing is much different from campaigning. But I think there is something to be said about how fervently the campaign centered itself on so-called progressive values and the talk of equity versus what Chicagoans are seeing in terms of policy and actions that are taken. That started to come out before the pandemic. Again, the strike is probably the biggest single event that laid that in front of everyone. But I also think that now with the budget season happening, we're starting to hear more of that bubbling up to the surface again.
Yeah, the budget has remained a challenge, and that strike really was her first test. Steve, Mayor Lightfoot's victory in 2019 was decisive. She won every ward. For a moment, Steve, the city was united behind her everywhere. Is that gone?
Well, I'm not an expert, not like you two, but I would say that it's certainly been challenged greatly because she's got a lot of opposition from the progressive side, you know, between the changes in the city council and the level of activism that is now going on in this city. Um, it's, you know, it's a tough environment, and she doesn't have that kind of huge mandate that was certainly showed up when she won something like 75% of the vote in the runoff with Tony Preckwinkle. You know, something Mara and I have talked about, it's like, you know, it seems like, you know, there's some the change in the way in which identity politics are playing out in this country, and particularly in this city right now, is really fascinating to me, because I think that the city rightfully was very proud of the fact that this outsider who had never held political office, at least outsider to the democratic machine, and someone who was gay and a Black woman who kind of came from nowhere in the last month and won, was a kind of, you know, a strike for democracy. And I think what's happened now is that that it's almost like be careful what you wish for, because now you know, people are saying, okay, now what are you going to do? You know, what are your policies going to be, to echo what Amara was just saying?
Steve, I want to get back to your project. You know, one can't help but think about businesses across the city, and you highlighted a number in the 5th episode. People are struggling, and obviously COVID-19 and the fallout could very much change the city's politics. It could change the winners and losers. What do you see as the political fallout of the pandemic?
The political fallout for the mayor, or just in general?
For the entire city.
Boy, why are you asking me all these tough questions?
Because you've been documenting the city for years. You've talked to everybody.
Okay.
Answers to you.
Fair enough. You know, I think for me, it's too early to tell. I know that there are people that feel like Lightfoot's chances at re-election as we sit here right now are slim, but you know, who knows where we will be by the time that election
bears that out, though, in fairness to her. I think she still polls very well. She still has.
Yeah. And I think she looks at the polls. That's something she looks at very closely in terms of how she makes her decisions. And you can say that's a good thing, or you can maybe wonder if that's the best thing. But I guess I see this city becoming more progressive politically as it moves on. At least I guess in some ways that's my hope, because I feel like there's a group of aldermen and alderwomen now who occupy a much more progressive flank in City Hall, and more so than I think ever. You know, I remember when I first moved here to Chicago back in '85, Harold Washington was mayor, and Eddie Bedroliak was at his zenith of opposing Washington. And, you know, we are in a whole different place than that, of course, now with this Black mayor. And I think that the challenges for her are going to be along the lines of what Amara said, which is, can you live up to the rhetoric of your campaigning?
Yeah. Amara, let's talk a little bit about the protests, the looting, and the rioting. In the episode, Maze Jackson, the radio host, suggests that there was an order to the looting. Some businesses were hit while others were spared. For example, corporate chains were looted while community health centers were not hit. I mentioned earlier that Dr. King quote about riots, the language of the unheard. What did you hear and see in the rioting and the looting?
Well, the main thing that I saw was frustration. So these uprisings did not, even the events with George Floyd, that wasn't necessarily the beginning. This is frustration from decades of disinvestment, decades of feeling unheard, communities being ignored, essentially in the city of Chicago, that happened to spill over in this moment where we had the perfect storm of events happening across the country, the pandemic, George Floyd, it was getting into the summertime, that sparked these uprisings. And so the biggest thing for me was, this is frustration that's built up. This didn't happen overnight. People didn't decide to go out and take part on just spur of the moment, at least most folks. I think it's the result of a lot of pent up frustration in Chicago. And it really speaks to the need to represent what the people of the city want. When I actually was able to get out there, what I saw was it was a mix. There were community-based businesses that I know that were not hit very intentionally. One in particular on the west side of Chicago, Turkey Chop. They do food giveaways every Monday. They're extremely involved in the community. They are, very well known by their neighbors. And the owner, who's a friend of mine, said he wasn't even in Chicago when the uprisings began. He was out of state. So he was so concerned because it looked like it was a melee. His business was untouched. In fact, some of the individuals in the community went out and stood around to protect it and make sure that it wasn't harmed. So I think there's a dynamic of businesses that had good relationships in the community, where the owners were known, where residents had a rapport. They were able to avoid some of the damage and the looting. And then, yes, those who perhaps didn't have that relationship or were parts of major chains ended up getting targeted. Now, of course, in the downtown area, it was pretty much fair game. But again, you saw that those who had a rapport in the community, there was at least some measure of protection, and some also had signs in their windows and so on and so forth. But it definitely wasn't just blanket across the board, anyone was getting looted. There were some businesses that were able to avoid it.
And can I just add real quick?
Yeah.
Just anecdotally, in my experience when we were out in the streets, that's so true, like Daly's restaurant, which is owned by a white guy family, but it's an icon in that 63rd and Cottage Grove down there in that neighborhood, and it has been forever. Didn't get touched, and they had a new restaurant, and it didn't get touched. And then Edwin, the pharmacist at Del Car Pharmacy in Lawndale, I talked to him about this. It didn't end up in the film, but I said, hey, were you ever concerned about your business getting damaged? And he said, he was concerned, but it didn't happen for all the reasons that Amar is talking about. So I think there's a lot of truth to that.
And Steve, there's a white man in your documentary that says it happens every time. One of them get killed, they riot. After George Floyd's death, there really was a remarkable show of unity. You highlight that. Blacks and whites protesting together peacefully. But by the end of the summer, that was gone, wasn't it?
Well, yeah, I think it changed. I don't think the unity between the black and white protesters went away, because I think, there have been plenty of protests, but, some other things started to enter into the mix, and one of the reasons we included what happened around the Columbus statue in Grant Park was because we thought that it was a particularly complicated moment for the city and for the protesters, because, I along with Miracle Boyd, the young activist that appears in the episode, my feeling is that, of course, the police superintendent is wrong if he implies that the people who organized that march also organized that, whatever that was, I think that's, that was provocative and wrong to do. But at the same time, the police were under siege there by a group of people who whose motives I don't quite know and don't pretend to know. And so I think that one of the problems with that is that no matter how overwhelmingly peaceful the protests are, right, and the protesters, it doesn't take but a small group to really sort of cast a whole different light on what's going on. And of course, the president, our president, has certainly seized on that.
Oh, he's very much commented on the events unfolding in Chicago. Amara, the Columbus statue coming down, I don't mean to be simplistic about it, but Black Chicagoans had a sense that they won that battle.
Sure. So there was a sense of having won that battle, but also there was a sense of, we've got some deep systemic issues that we need to be addressed, and we don't want things to stop at removal of statues. And I think it's important to highlight that, because on the one hand, the public celebration of an individual like Christopher Columbus, when we have this battle going on with Chicago Public Schools, whether it's going to be Indigenous Peoples Day versus Columbus Day. And then you had this warring between those who wanted the statues removed and those who wanted to keep the statues up. So I think the removal was seen as a victory, but there were also a lot of conversations, particularly in the Black community, around, well, we don't want our victories to be statue removal. We want these issues of inequity, of economic strife, we want all those issues to be addressed. And so there was some sense that, okay, we can celebrate this, but this better not be the extent to which we're going to get the changes that we're pushing for, because there's so many deep issues that we need to address as well.
You know, one of the things that really struck me is, and we tried to get at this in episode 5, is that very question. I put it to Mayor Lightfoot about, you know, whether when protests turn violent, whether, you know, real change happens unless there is some measure of violence or you know, more than just peaceful protest, let's say. And of course, she's like, no. But I feel like that incident in Grant Park is precisely an example. If that hadn't unfolded the way it had, I don't know that those statues would have been down by now. So it did have some impact that I think is unmistakable.
And I think there is a sense out there that this was about helping the police, frankly, because, you know, they're protecting a statue. They're not out in the neighborhoods solving crime, and rather than guarding a statue where people were being very violent and bringing their bottles, trying to tear it down, you know, you're in fact helping out the police. You know, they're not bearing the brunt of this symbolic issue. Were you going to say something more?
Yeah, I was just going to say that it's completely ahistorical to ignore the notion that violence as a part of protest and movements is not a catalyst for change. I mean, you don't have to be a believer to say, yes, people should be violent and out in the streets. But if you look at the history of any change, any movement, any revolution, anywhere in the world, there has always been that component of violence, because it's created the discomfort necessary for the power structure to change. And I think I always got this sense that people wanted to be ahistorical because they didn't want to seem like they were condoning violence. But I think we have to be honest that a lot of things that have been pushed for throughout history, even in the civil rights movement, which was a nonviolent movement, occurred when there were instances of violence on any side, whether it was on the side of police or on the side of, you know, agitators and so on and so forth.
So where is the line? I hear in that maybe a sense that property damage and destruction, you know, there's insurance that can be repaired, particularly, you know, if these are folks who don't live in the community, haven't been investing. Where is that line crossed? Is it a water bottle of urine thrown at an officer?
Well, I don't know that it's to draw the line. I think it's to simply understand. I think a lot of times people were questioning throughout the uprisings, well, why is there violence? Why are they so angry? And so we have to come from a place of understanding to say, I understand, or I can empathize, or I sympathize, or I at least hear where they're coming from, that these are people who, for the most part, and I'm not talking about the opportunists, but a lot of these folks live in communities that have been completely decimated over decades. And if I live in a bubble in Lincoln Park, well, I don't have the context to understand a level of anger that would cause someone to go and bust out the windows at Cartier or Givenchy or any other place downtown. So it's not to say you're not condoning it, and we're not drawing a bright line about this is up to this line is when it's acceptable. It's to say that you cannot predict when folks have been living in substandard conditions, you can't control how they react to the oppression that they experience. And I think we would all be good to really understand that a little bit better.
You pronounced the name of those fancy stores very well there, Amara. Steve,
we're talking about been there a lot.
Still a serious topic here. When we're talking about violence, you know, in the documentary, Mayor Lightfoot says people don't feel like public safety. People feel like public safety is just something for the wealthy, is what she says. There are some Chicagoans, Steve, who just don't feel safe.
Yeah, I mean, you know, I don't agree with her overall conclusion about that she should never support the defunding of the police at all. I think that really needs to be examined very closely and look at different ways in which the money can be spent, for sure. But I also concede her point. I mean, that there are neighborhoods where the violence is palpable enough that the residents are in fear. It was interesting in episode 4 of the series, we have the debate over the police academy, and we show the city hall debate, and Walter Burnett, the alderman, stands up at one point and he says, "We want more police running around our neighborhood, not less." Now, I don't think Walter necessarily represents everyone in his ward with that statement, but I do think he represents some people, absolutely.
Yeah, and just to let everyone know, we're going to get to student questions here in about 5 minutes. So please keep your questions going. Mara, kind of something open-ended I wanted to ask you. During your run for mayor, what did you learn about the voting electorate?
I learned that it takes a lot to get different outcomes from the usual outcomes. When we started out, and when I started out, the goal was to win, but it was also to make sure that we really pushed this message, this people-centered message, that we resonated with the people of Chicago in a way that they may not have had a candidate that did that before. So coming out as someone who's never been elected to office, someone who doesn't fit with the typical profile, I'm not a part of the Chicago political machine, very intentionally. The goal was for Chicagoans to see themselves in a candidate, and if they see themselves in a candidate or in a campaign, then maybe they would get that push to actually participate in an election. And so we have abysmal turnout rates at our elections, right? So we're looking at 30% of the electorate actually comes out to vote. And I think while a lot of folks might say, well, why don't people vote? We actually came at it from the lenses, we understand why a lot of folks don't vote, because they don't necessarily connect whomever is on the 5th floor in City Hall with their quality of life. And so for us, the campaign became a way of embodying Chicagoans who have been disaffected. And we did that through my personal experience as not coming from the wealthy background and having the same struggles that most Chicagoans, or maybe not most, but a lot of Chicagoans have, whether it's with tickets or rent or student loans or any of those things that people are really struggling with, and deciding to lean into that and say, this is why I'm running. This is why these narratives are important, because it might encourage folks who have those similar experiences to say, maybe if we vote for her, then some of the material will experience some material changes in our quality of life. And it's a very noble endeavor. And I definitely would take that same approach. But I think what we saw is the sort of entrenched cynicism it's really baked in, and it's hard to get people to feel that spark of hope that anything will be different this time around. And so the best moments of the campaign were people saying, especially young people, I've never voted for a person ever. I've never gotten involved in an election until now. You're the first person that's actually made me feel like getting out to vote. Those were the best moments. I think the more sort of somber moments were realizing that it's not enough to move the needle to where we'd have 50 and 60% turnout, which could have really changed the game for a candidate like myself that's not backed by a machine or backed by a whole lot of money.
Yeah, and of course, Amara, your run is highlighted in the documentary. Steve, it kind of something really for the both of you. Looking ahead, you see tensions between Mayor Lightfoot and Governor Pritzker. The governor's placed restrictions on Chicago bars and restaurants in response to the rising COVID numbers. What do you think is going to happen to the city this winter?
God, I think it's going to be really potentially, I don't know, catastrophic. I mean, a lot of these restaurants, and I'm not just talking about high-end restaurants downtown, but those too. When dining has to go indoors, and with the restrictions and the possible new restrictions coming in, I know I've heard from a number of them just anecdotally that they're not going to make it. And when you multiply that to other kinds of businesses in this city that that are going to be affected, I don't know. It's not a pretty picture, and I worry very much about it. And because, as you guys know, Chicago has been in a tough spot for a long time, particularly in certain neighborhoods, in certain parts of the city. I mean, the Black exodus of Chicago has been, and with these new hardships, I'm sure it will fall in greater weight on those neighborhoods as well.
And it's kind of something we haven't touched on yet, Amara. Obviously, COVID-19 has exacerbated the existing disparities that we have in the city.
Yeah, it really has. The pandemic just exposed a lot. It exposed a lot of the issues that really came out in the election last in 2019, when we were talking about just the level of inequity, whether it was economic justice issues, environmental justice issues. I mean, you've seen over the course of the pandemic playing out, it's just exposed those things, whether it was in Little Village, where, they're already experiencing a lot of environmental justice issues and sort of a demolition of a major structure that contributed to further respiratory hazards in that area, to now where we're looking at increasing fines and fees for driving 6 miles above the speed limit. And we know that that's just an issue of revenue. It's not really about safety, it's about revenue. But we also had talked about in the campaign the fact that those kind of regressive fines and fees are going to disproportionately hurt Black and Brown communities that are lower income. And so the mayor and the administration just is in a tough spot, having to balance the revenue needs and the financial crisis that we're in with the values of, do we care about all of our residents? And are we going to make sure that our most vulnerable residents don't bear the brunt of the pandemic?
That's a great point. In the mayor's budget, there is some additional revenue collection, more parking meters added, and hitting people with speeding tickets 6 miles an hour over rather than 10 miles an hour that the red light cameras do. Let's open this up to a student question out there. Our first question comes from Jonathan Rockover. Jonathan, the floor is yours.
Great. Thanks so much. My name is Jonathan. I am a master's student studying computer science and political policy. I just was wondering kind of given that it's really only been a year and a half of the Lightfoot administration so far, what at this point leaves you both, I would say, optimistic or pessimistic about the rest of the Lightfoot administration?
Thanks, Jonathan.
Well, I can say I'm optimistic. I'm optimistic because the disruption that's happened around the world is so great that it creates space, I think, to do things differently. I think that there's space to innovate. A lot of the things that we've talked about, and even in this conversation around defunding the police and investing in communities, just looking at housing differently and having affordable housing, like as catastrophic as the year has been, the disruption creates space for us to not be locked into the way that we've always done things. And that's partly why, even with the budget conversation, it's a little disappointing, because these are things that we did when Rahm Emanuel was mayor, when Daley was mayor. It's sort of the same set of policy proposals. And so I'm optimistic that maybe she'll take advantage of the fact that nothing is normal right now, and that's okay. How can we now use that to start take some risk and be a little bit more bold? So I'm leading into that optimism.
And I would just add that, she says in episode 5 at one point that she took some time to think about how she communicates with people, and the people who disagree with her. And I hope that that's for real, and that's ongoing, that it's not just good politics to say that. Because I think that if there's one thing that has hurt her up to now, it has been her propensity to draw lines in the sand over issues and then not want to compromise or listen to compromise. And I'm hoping that she's getting it. She's never been a politician before, and this is a tough ass city to run by anyone. So I'm hoping she's learning that, and that, I think that will serve her well in terms of going forward with policy, but also with relationships with the people that she needs to have good relationships with.
Chicago likes a strong mayor. Usually, though, when they butt heads with the city council, that's taken care of behind the scenes. And we have seen repeatedly that their fights have spilled out into the public. Jonathan, great question. Thanks very much. Let's do another one. This one is from an undergrad in the class of 2023, Lauren Leggett. Lauren, the Zoom is yours.
Hello. Yeah, I just had two quick things. So first, I did want to know, like, what were some of the businesses you guys mentioned that were actually protected during the riots? I have some friends who are working on a project, and that information would be so useful. And my question, though, was in the conversation between defunding the police, why do you think that such a progressive policy is not being put forth by Lori Lightfoot, as many activists have pointed out? Why is it maybe not being supported? Because I'm just not as into the political realm of that decision.
Thank you. Thank you.
So the business that I mentioned was Turkey Chop there in West Humboldt Park. There's also a business called Shine King in the Austin community. There are businesses on 43rd Street, Sip and Savor, which is one of my favorite coffee shops on the South Side. Neither of the locations that they have were harmed. So there are quite a few businesses that came out okay. And perhaps we can provide just a short list for the students, for you all, so that you have that information. On the defunding question, again, this gets back to, is there a track record of actually standing on those kinds of progressive issues? I mean, it's one thing to be able to say things during a campaign, but has there been any indication that defunding the police would be something that she would stand for before she was a candidate? And if you don't have any kind of track record, then it's harder to I guess, to accept that maybe that's just not where she is philosophically. And so I think a lot of folks are discovering that perhaps she's not the progressive, and as far as their definition of progressive, she's not what they thought. Some of the pushback also, I think, comes from a fundamental misunderstanding of what defunding the police means. Defunding is about priorities. It's about taking some of the $1.78 billion that goes into the police budget, the public safety budget, and actually putting some of those resources into schools, mental health facilities, affordable housing, all of the things that build strong individuals and communities, because we know that police on their own are not the solution to violence in Chicago. And so we've seen many aspects of the budget cut over years. The environmental department, the entire department was cut. We've seen mental health clinics closed, that budget was cut. We've seen education, that budget is always being reduced. And yet the police budget has increased every year to the point where now it's 40%, public safety is 40% of our operating budget. So defunding is about priorities and saying, we've got to try a more holistic approach to public safety, and community strength that doesn't involve simply investing in more police officers and police infrastructure.
I'll mention the two places in the series, Del Car Pharmacy, it's in North Lawndale, and Daly's Restaurant, which is at 63rd and Cottage Grove. I know for a fact in both those cases that was the situation. Just to add to what Amar said, and I could be off base with this because I don't consider myself a political pundit at all. But I wouldn't be surprised if part of Lori Lightfoot's calculation in all this is that she does not want to alienate the police. And that coming out in support of defund the police, that she runs some risk of alienating police and the people who believe in a strong police force and a need for a strong police force. Because I wouldn't be surprised if she doesn't think back to, that time in, when in the wake of Laquan McDonald and the police felt under siege in this city, and there was a tick up in violence, and there was this feeling like, well, the cops were kind of like, okay. I mean, I don't know if that's true, but there was this feeling like, okay, you don't want me to do this? I won't do it. I'll just sit in my car. And things, got more out of hand. So I don't know, you guys would probably be better to weigh in on that, but I wouldn't be surprised if that weighs into some of her calculation.
No, that's right, Steve. I think she also doesn't view it as either or. You could have a strong police force. We can have a lot of officers. They can have the latest technology, but also there can be investments in the South and West Side. Now, they're budget realities, of course, but I think that's kind of where she's coming from. Before we do another student question, just Amara, a woman says in the episode that she doesn't trust the cops, that they're thugs, she calls them. How do we repair police community relations in the city?
Well, one of the best ways to repair police community relations is just with accountability. I mean, one of the biggest issues that you'll hear is, when things happen, when individuals are killed by police. I mean, it wasn't until the Jason Van Dyke's trial, which is actually where I met Steve, that there was a sense that, oh, an officer is actually going to be held accountable. I mean, this is the city of, the individuals in Austin that were tortured by police. This is the city of John Burge. There's such a long history of police violence and abuse and corruption that when people don't see anyone being held to account, when they see that Rekia Boyd's killer, who is a police officer, just gets to go quietly off into the sunset, it erodes any trust between police and community. And so I think a lot of the initial steps, why people are so vehement about we've got to do something about these police officers, is because they just don't have a sense that the institution is going to work on their behalf. And that goes for the criminal justice system as a whole, but especially in Chicago because of its sordid past with police torture and police brutality.
Yeah, let's do another student question here. Stephen Herman is on the line. The Zoom is yours, Stephen.
Thank you. So my name is Stephen Herman. I'm a current Booth student getting my MBA, and I am currently in Archer Heights, which is in the Chicago infamous 14th Ward. My question is somewhat related to where I live. What are the important and achievable reforms to Chicago's power structure and elections system that can facilitate a more democratic and equitable Chicago?
Great question. Thank you.
I just jump in for part of that. I think that, Lori Lightfoot said when she was running that the petition, she was appalled by the petition challenge process, as were a lot of candidates. And she vowed to try to reform that process. I do think that would help. I think that she hasn't made any moves on that yet, but I do think that looking to reform that challenge process so that, number one, it doesn't require so many signatures to run for mayor, but that it's the gamesmanship and the political hardball, which is just so rampant in that part of the process. I think it would help if something was done about that, so that candidates with limited resources and limited means would not be at such a disadvantage when it comes to even running for office.
Amara, you get the final word.
Well, yeah, I mean, if it were up to me, the date of the election would be different, perhaps in the spring or summer, not in the dead of winter. Definitely the threshold for signatures would be different. I mean, there's so many things that could be done differently, but I think the way that it's structured now is designed to keep people out. But I would definitely push for change the day of the election, reduce the threshold for the number of signatures that you need. Let's just start there. And I think that would have a significant impact on the electoral process.
Well, believe it or not, folks, we are out of time. That absolutely flew by. But Steve, James, we can't wait for tomorrow, Thursday night, to watch your final product. So many of us are in it. You talk to every Chicagoan, you talk to all the candidates, all the reporters are in it. So we're really excited about it. Steve, James, Amara, Enya, thank you so much. Thank you for joining us. This discussion has been recorded and it'll be posted on the Institute of Politics YouTube channel. And a special thanks to the University of Chicago Institute of Politics and the Center for Effective Government. Please, everybody, stay healthy out there. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you.